Time now for the political analysis of Fromm and Fuller. Al Fromm, former political advisor to President Bill Clinton, and Craig Fuller, former political advisor to both President Ronald Reagan and George H.W. Bush. Good morning, all. Al, I'd like to start with you. It seemed like a surreal moment to see those photos of Republicans and Democrats in the Oval Office the other day negotiating with President Biden on a COVID relief package. Do you think we're back to the good old days where sausage is made and Washington is a place where Democrats and the GOP find mid-ground?
No, I don't think we're back to the good old days. We're not going to have that same old process where, we made sausage by Republicans and Democrats getting in a room, sitting there for weeks, grinding out a product. I just don't think that'll happen. And the reason it won't happen is the parties are different today than they were back when Craig and I were in real business. I mean, today, the most conservative Democrat is more liberal than the most liberal Republican. So there's not that overlap that allows a number of people in both parties to easily work together. But nonetheless, I think in the end, this package will get some Republican votes, maybe not many, but a few. And so in that sense, it'll be bipartisan. They're going to probably wind up using the reconciliation process. And I know something about that because we created reconciliation in the Congressional Budget Act in 1974, and I was one of the principal staff authors of that bill. And reconciliation was supposed to be reconciliation. It was an expedited process. The way the process is supposed to work, the Congress was supposed to pass a budget resolution in the spring. Then in the summer, they passed all their spending bills. But the spending bills in total may have added up to more or less than the budget. And so the reconciliation bill was a process by which Congress then had 10 days to reconcile the differences between the individual actions and the collective budget. Obviously, both parties, since it was an expedited procedure, have tried to figure out ways to exploit that, and they've done it pretty well. And both parties have used it to put through legislation that they, in a sense, in a filibuster-proof way. I think the key thing here to watch, since we have a 50-50 split, is where, look at where the most conservative Democrat is. I mean, I'd watch Joe Manchin, because with a 50-50 split, the Democrats can't afford to lose even one vote. And so if Manchin or Kristen Sinema or Mark Kelly or John Hickenlooper or one of the more moderate Democrats decides, I can't do this kind of thing, that would prevent them from using reconciliation, just as John McCain's vote stopped the Republicans from derailing or stopping Obamacare with 2 or 3 years ago with his key vote. So watch Manchin. Now, and I think because Manchin is really a fairly conservative guy, there'll be some Republicans who probably can go with what he would let the Democrats get by. Let me just make one other point, because just so sort of explain what I see going on. I teach a class at Johns Hopkins on policy and politics in the graduate school, and we just started it. And I have 3 rules for an idea. Let's just take this COVID bill as that idea. First is it's got to make sense. Ronald Reagan taught me that. And, I think most people would say, it makes sense to have a big effort to deal with the pandemic. The second is first impressions matter. And I think that's an important thing, because if Biden can get a bipartisan vote on his first issue, it will, and it's going to be tough because it's also going to be in the time of impeachment. I think that will benefit him down the road. So I think he'll try to do something that will at least get some Republicans on it. And the third thing is you create your own playing field if you can, because you always want to have a home field advantage. And in this case, with the filibuster being used as it has in modern times to block anything anybody doesn't like, not for special, major legislative fights. Reconciliation is probably the home field the Democrats are going to have to create. Just to sum up, I think we'll get Republican votes because I think Biden wants to get Republican votes. And I think there are places like targeting and maybe doing the minimum wage separately, a couple of things like that he can give them that might get 1 or 2 or 3 votes. But I don't think you'll see a real bipartisan bill in the sense that 15 or 20 Republicans come along.
So Craig, no sausage being made in Washington?
There'll be some made. I don't know that these are the good old days for sure. In part because President Biden is not able to deal with really the leadership among Republicans in the Senate side. And however, I think what he did is more about a long-term play, and that is showing respect for certain Republicans in the Senate. There is nothing that people who serve in elective office enjoy more than a visit to the Oval Office, with the possible exception of a visit to Camp David. And I'll bet you we're going to see that sometime when the weather warms up in the Catoctin Mountains. And President Biden knows that having these dialogues, showing respect, having interaction, is going to help him over the course of his first term, the next 4 years. So I thought it was a very smart step for him to take. I don't think that even the Republicans who came to visit had an expectation that their plan was going to be embraced, and it's not likely that it will. But as Al says, it's part of a process that may win some Republican votes, and also there's a lot of ways to show respect and appreciation for those Republicans who are trying. A good OMB director has hundreds of options at his or her disposal to help members of the Senate or the House, for that matter. So I think that it's not Reagan dealing with blue dog Democrats to get a large block of votes, although that is an example of in that case, Republican president showing respect for more conservative, moderate Democrats. So I think Biden's move was a good step forward. I do think that he does have to find some way to acknowledge that he heard what they were saying and provide some movement in that direction. But I heard one of the leading Democrats on the morning news this morning talking about how they have negotiating room. I'm not sure that that's a message the White House wanted her to say, but nonetheless, that's what she said. And so I don't think that this Republican group is locked out of the process by any means. And hopefully it's the beginning of a little more constructive interaction.
Greg, staying with you, it would seem like it would be very hard for the Republicans to find a more divisive leader than Donald Trump, but it seems that Marjorie Taylor Greene, the newly elected congresswoman from Georgia, might be even out trumping Trump. How can the GOP find equilibrium within their party before the 2022 election?
It would be hard to find anybody more divisive. I'm not sure that Marjorie Taylor Greene is really in charge of anything. I'm not sure she's in charge of Marjorie Taylor Greene on any given day. The views that she espouses are just unacceptable. I was reflecting that having recruited people to various positions, both in government as well as in private sector, if you saw her resume and you saw those statements, she'd never even make a small group of finalists for a job. I mean, nobody would hire somebody who has that kind of disposition. Now, the voters in her district have every right, if they wish to elect her, some may decide they want to recall her, some may decide they don't want to re-elect her in the future. I don't know. It's their decision. But honestly, the Republican leadership in the House ought to reject her engagement and involvement with the caucus. It's only going to prove divisive. I kind of shake my head when I hear people suggest, or she suggests, that these were statements she made before she got elected. Well, of course they were, but I would put her about as far a back bench as they can find, and let's wait a year or two and see just what her views are, and let her stand for re-election. I don't think there's any place for her in the Republican caucus.
Al, you have the last word.
Well, I agree with Craig on that. There's no place for her in either major or either mainstream party. Look, the Republicans probably need to purge her. They probably, because she was elected, I mean, I suppose they could join in an effort to expel her, but that's probably not going to happen. But they should certainly discipline her, not give her a committee assignment, but they're not going to do it. Look, and what that does is it feeds into a Democratic strategy that says we're going to define the Republicans as Marjorie Taylor Greene. And to a lesser extent is Donald Trump disrupting democracy through the impeachment process. You know, it's sort of what the Republicans did last time in 2020 with the squad. You wouldn't think, you'd think that Joe Biden's initials were AOC. So that's, in fact, I think I already saw an ad that the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee has up. I think it was in Nebraska, that tying, a candidate to the extremists. The Republicans really have a problem because, as we saw last night in their conference meeting, even in a secret ballot, you had 61 House Republicans. That's a third of the House Republicans who voted for what I would call an extremist position, to dump somebody out of your leadership because of a vote on impeachment. And their problem is that QAnon candidates, or at least extremist candidates, win primaries. Not all of them, but they can win a lot of Republican primaries, particularly in the House, sometimes in the Senate. But they do terribly in general elections, in statewide elections, and in the suburban districts that usually determine who controls the House. So, given historical trends, the Republicans should win Congress, probably both houses, in 2022. But if the Republicans refuse to deal with QAnon, that could save the Democrats. Now, I don't want to equate this because it's not the same thing, but we had the same problem with our left. They could win in the 70s and 80s. They could win primaries, but then they'd get clobbered in general elections. The Republicans probably need a big defeat, because there's nothing like a real defeat to make people realize you got to change. And the problem for the Republicans is they came very close in the Congress last time. They think, well, Trump's out of the way, we're going to be just fine, so why should we make a big change? And maybe they'll be okay, but I suspect that many of those suburban congressional seats that they won this time to close the margin will go back to the Democrats if they are defined as a QAnon party.
We'll have to leave it there. Al Fromm, Craig Fuller, thank you very much indeed. See you next week.